everyone, I'm Ashley Hunt, Senior Project Management Instructor here at Stormwind Epic Live. And my blog today is all about how to put together a comprehensive project management plan that's based on reality. That's very difficult to do, and a lot of times when we're talking about best practices in a PMP class or a fundamentals class or a PMBOK focus course, a lot of that is really based on best practices and perfect world project management. But let's drill it down to actual reality. And what are some of the things that we can do as project managers to put together a realistic project management plan that works? What's the very first thing we have to do? Well, a perfect world project management plan is a unicorn. There is no such thing as perfect world project management in reality. Our job is to put together a plan that is mostly nonfiction. Sometimes we cross our fingers and hope things are going to go our way. But the bottom line is, if we can start to ask good questions and start to gather the right information, that's going to go a long way to helping us put together a plan that's nonfiction. Very first thing, obviously, is that we need to know what the deliverables are. And I'm not just talking about product scope. I'm talking about project scope. What are the big deliverables that are expected of us and our team? How do we get from start to finish? I find that this is a really rhetorical type of question, but a good brainstorming exercise with the team to say, how do we get from the start to the finish line? What does that look like to everybody? What's our strategy going to be? And also doing research, not just on your team and your customer, but also start to take a deeper dive into what your project looks like and what that strategy will be. And certainly plan for the unplanned, expect the unexpected, and make sure that you're well ingrained in risk management so that you can manage those fires that happen by accident or that you didn't expect when they occur. So what research should we be doing? What do you mean? Well, have a solid understanding of the customer's needs and expectations. We know they change, but we need to be able to ask questions throughout the project that says, hey, what are your needs this week? What are your expectations this week or this month? So that we can really gather those expectations and place them in reality instead of in an assumption. Also, who's your project sponsor and how involved are they in your day-to-day? Sometimes the customer is also the sponsor, and so 1 and 2 are definitely important. What are the tough questions, though, that need to be answered in order to be successful? I often get asked by students or people that email me, like, what types of questions? Do you have a list of questions that I need to ask? Here's a couple of them anyway. Is there anything that could cause the project to be unsuccessful? That's an excellent question. And again, it's vague in nature, but it's designed to generate a lot of different opinions, expectations, fear, all of those things that we can discuss as a team or with our customers and our PMOs and so on. Is there a point that we will be providing updates to additional stakeholders or larger groups that are defined now? Remember, stakeholders come and go. And those stakeholders that could be coming in later in the project, you might not have identified yet. So it's important to ask the question if that is possible. And if so, be ready for it. How are you going to gather feedback? Or even how are we going to give feedback? Is that 360-degree review? Are we going to be giving feedback to our team once a week, once a month? And how do we gather feedback from our customer, from our team, from our sponsor to really truly figure out what's the vibe of the project and how are things going? Has your team been through a similar project in the past and was it successful? If so, why? And or why not? Because if you're acquiring team members from different areas of your organization, they all have their expert judgment to bring with them, and asking them, hey, what's your opinion, is a good way to generate conversation. Are there any areas of potential misunderstandings that you can address or communicate? This helps you develop your communications management plan and also deal with expectations and assumptions. Is there a list of absolutes, like must absolutely have to the project scope, the schedule, the budget? What are the absolutes? Because these are constraints and we need to plan around them. Are there time frames that are specific? I mean, this really goes back to certainly constraints on the scheduling side, but it could be for acquisition of resources, deliveries from procurement, sellers, or vendors. So these are excellent questions to ask, at least to generate some answers that can help you plan much more effectively. How do you know that you've planned enough? Well, this is kind of my checklist for how do I know I've done enough planning. Do I have the milestones, scope, and deliverables? Are they clearly defined and understood by all key stakeholders? That's a big question, and not everybody can say yes to that. Do you know who is responsible for the tasks and expert judgment? Have durations been estimated with consideration for risk and start and finish dates that are set? Have you effectively estimated costs or itemized your budget across your life cycle? You understand who your stakeholders are and what they want. Granted, that changes, but we're going to keep on top of that and keep asking questions. Do we have dependencies that have been considered? Mandatory, discretionary, internal, external dependencies that are going to drive different areas of our schedule. And have we documented that? Do we have a solid communications management plan? Is it created? Does everybody know what's in it? Have you gotten sign off on it? Do we know what the metrics for success are today? Are they well known? Risk, big time. Has it been planned for? Do you have a risk register? Do you have responses? Do you have risk owners? Do you know what the triggers are? Do you know what the expectations are? Are they well known and well set? And do you understand your own process as a project manager? What your strategy is, what your limitations are, and the personalities on your team? How well do you know them? Do you know them personally? And can you manage, motivate, direct, and work with the team of people that you have? And if so, you've planned enough. But in some cases, it's kind of like, I don't know if I've planned too much. I don't know if I've got mostly enough to be somewhat successful, or I've done too much planning. Well, clearly there's a fine line, and it depends on your project, certainly. Can't put everything into a little bubble here, but too little planning is really, I've got a schedule, I've got a budget, and I kind of know the scope of work. That's it. No communication management plan, no risk, no quality, no HR management plans, nothing. That's not enough. So when we look at mostly enough, you've got a project charter, you've got the necessary plans for your project management plan, you've got your baselines for scope, time, and cost, you've got a risk register, you know your metrics, you've got a comprehensive strategy, and you have a stakeholder register. That's mostly enough. And somewhere between mostly enough and too much is that sweet spot in project management. But too much, you've never left your desk. I used to call people like that pod squatters. They just sit in their desk and that's all they do. Your project plan is very difficult to navigate. Like people just gave up looking at it because they can't understand it. You've spent more time creating that plan than determining what to put into it. And there's confusion from the stakeholders and the team. If that's going on, then you've spent way too much trying to put together too comprehensive a plan to create that unicorn, and it's just not realistic. What's a reasonable level of effort to dedicate to project management based on the size or cost of the project? Because things are going to be different based on the size, the cost, and the scope of your project, but it depends. How many specific stakeholders and key stakeholder groups are you managing? The bigger and the more communication channels, the harder it is. How uncertain is the scope of work? Too conceptual in the scope of work leads to more time spent. Aggressive scheduling or cost constraints. You're going to need more planning to meet anything that's aggressive as a constraint. What's the level of project management maturity in your organization? Do you have a PMO that helps you out? Do you have a sponsor? Or are you sort of flying by the seat of your pants and really don't have a support system? What's the number of direct reports versus departmental heads? Less planning is needed with fewer direct reports. Full-time resources versus part-time. Part-time resources, believe it or not, takes more planning. And certainly larger projects require more effort on our part, but we have to determine the size and the scope and really make the best determination for what's going to work for us. What percentage or level of effort for project managers is normal? Well, it's approximately 10 to 30%. On top of the effort to deliver the product or the project, you spend about 30% of your time, maximum really, working the project plan, planning and checking up and doing status reports. Now, if you're in a strong matrix or projectized organization, 10% in very large projects and 30% in smaller projects. Why? Because you have more support from the top in larger projects, whereas smaller projects, you're probably managing them more or less by yourself and your team, so you'd have to spend more time planning that out. Hopefully that helped answer some of your questions. I think it probably generated more questions, but the questions that I discuss in this blog are essential to not only ask yourself, but your stakeholders, your customer, your team, before you sit down to begin planning. Really ask yourself, how can I make this plan effective and make it nonfiction? Hopefully you enjoyed this blog, and I will see you in class. For everybody here at Storman Studios, I'm Ashley Hunt. I'll see you next time.